I love solo road trips. There's something about the freedom of the open road. No schedule, no obligations, just me, my music, and the endless stretch of highway ahead. But this time, I took a wrong turn, and I ended up on a road that shouldn't exist. It was late, around 2 a.m. I had been driving for hours, trying to make it to a small motel in a rural town before crashing for the night. The highway was empty, my headlights cutting through the fog rolling in from the fields. Then, my GPS glitched. The map flickered, and the voice calmly instructed, "Recalculating. Take the next right." I frowned. That didn't seem right. I had been following one straight road for miles, but I figured why not? I took the turn, and everything changed. Immediately, the road became narrower. The pavement looked old, cracked, uneven. No streetlights, no signs, just endless dark trees on either side. I tried checking my phone, but no signal. I wasn't too worried at first. Maybe the GPS rerouted me on a back road. Then I looked at the clock. 2:07 a.m. I kept driving. The road stretched on unchanging, no landmarks, no intersections. I checked the clock again. 2:07 a.m. My stomach twisted. That wasn't possible. I kept driving. Another 20 minutes. Checked the clock. 2:07 a.m. That's when I realized I wasn't moving, or at least the road wasn't changing. I had been driving in a loop, and I wasn't alone. My grip tightened on the wheel. I needed to turn around, find another way out. I slowed down, looking for a place to turn. Then my headlights caught something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road, a woman. She was wearing a long white dress, her hair hanging over her face, her arms limp at her sides. She wasn't moving. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. She stood there, completely still. I turned on my high beams, and she disappeared. Not walked away, not faded, gone. I wasn't staying to find out what the hell was going on. I whipped the car around, tires skidding against the pavement, and floored it back the way I came. The road stretched out in front of me, the same as before. Too long, too empty. And then, the radio crackled to life. Soft at first, just static. Then, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze. I hadn't touched the radio. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Turn back." I slammed the off button, but the whisper didn't stop. "Turn back. Turn back. Turn back." I was screaming now, slamming my hands against the wheel. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. I don't know how long I drove, but at some point I saw headlights in the distance. A gas station. A real one. I veered off the cursed road so fast my tires nearly skidded off the pavement. I pulled into the lot, shaking, heart pounding. When I looked back, the road was gone. Just a field of trees stretching into the darkness. No pavement, no turnoff, just nothing. I stumbled into the gas station, pale, sweating. The clerk gave me a weird look. "You okay?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "That road, the one leading here, where does it go?" He frowned. "What road?" "I don't take back roads anymore. And when my GPS tells me to recalculate, I don't listen." I've taken enough flights to know the routine. Check in, board, sleep through most of it, wake up just in time for landing. It's always the same. But this flight was different. Because when we landed, we weren't where we were supposed to be. It was supposed to be a simple red-eye flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo. The takeoff was smooth, and I dozed off soon after. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up just as the plane was descending. I rubbed my eyes, stretched, and glanced out the window. That's when I felt something was off. There were no city lights, no highways, no signs of civilization at all, just thick fog rolling over the runway as we touched down. The plane came to a stop, and the seatbelt sign flickered off. But no one stood up to grab their bags, no chatter, no movement. The passengers just sat there staring ahead. I swallowed hard and leaned toward the window, trying to see anything outside. The airport terminal was dark. No signs, no workers, no planes. I checked my phone, no signal. Then the overhead speaker crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your final destination." Not Tokyo, not anywhere, just your final destination. I forced myself to stand, trying to act normal. Maybe the airport was just a smaller, remote terminal. I grabbed my bag and followed the other passengers down the jet bridge. Everything was silent. No airline workers, no security, just a long, dimly lit hallway leading into an empty terminal. I turned to the man walking next to me. "Hey, do you know where we are?" He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. I tried again, tapping his arm. He stopped walking, his head slowly turning toward me, too slowly. And then he smiled. A strange, frozen grin. "Welcome home," he whispered. I stepped back, heart pounding. I needed to find an exit. Now the airport looked abandoned. Dusty counters, empty chairs, flickering lights. Then I saw the departure board. One single flight was listed. The same flight. My flight. And the time? It never changed. The screen glitched, flickering between symbols I didn't recognize. And for the first time I noticed the airport signs. They weren't in any language I knew. I turned and ran. Down empty corridors, past unmoving passengers, through silent security checkpoints. Then, in the distance, I saw it. An open door. Bright daylight spilled in, contrasting the eerie dimness of the airport. I sprinted toward it, lungs burning. Just as I reached the exit, I felt hands grabbing my shoulders. I twisted, expecting to see an airport worker. But it was the smiling man from the plane. "You can't leave," he whispered. I shoved him back and threw myself through the door. I hit the ground hard, but instead of pavement, it was carpet. Soft, familiar airplane carpet. I gasped, sitting up. I was back in my seat. The plane was descending. Outside, the bright skyline of Tokyo stretched beneath us. A flight attendant walked past, smiling warmly. "Sir, we'll be landing shortly." I turned, looking around. Everything was normal. The passengers were awake, talking, stretching, checking their phones. Had I imagined everything? I let out a shaky breath, laughing to myself. Then, as the plane touched down, I glanced at the passenger next to me. He was already looking at me, smiling, and in a whisper only I could hear, he said, "Welcome home." I love solo travel, exploring new cities at night, getting lost in unfamiliar streets. It's all part of the adventure. But after what happened in Buenos Aires, I don't take taxis alone anymore. It was late, around 1 a.m., and I had just finished a long night of wandering through the city. The streets were quiet, and I was exhausted, so I decided to take a taxi back to my hotel. A yellow cab was waiting near the curb, the driver staring straight ahead, hands gripping the wheel. I opened the door and slid in. "Hotel San Martin, please." The driver nodded but didn't say a word. The car smelled faintly of stale air, old leather, and something I couldn't quite place. As we pulled away from the curb, I glanced at my phone. No service. That was normal for some parts of the city. Or at least, I told myself it was. Then, after a few minutes, I realized something. We weren't heading toward my hotel. I leaned forward. "I think you took the wrong turn." No response. The driver kept his hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. The city lights were getting fainter. The streets were darker. We were leaving the main road, heading down narrow, unfamiliar alleys. "Hey, I think we're going the wrong way." My voice shook slightly. Still no response. He didn't even glance at me. I checked my phone again. No service, no Wi-Fi, no GPS. Something was very, very wrong. I took a slow breath. "Sir, I need you to stop the car." He didn't react. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles bone white. The alley got narrower. The buildings loomed closer. Then, in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I saw his face in the rearview mirror. He was smiling, not a normal smile, a wide, stretched, unnatural grin, like he had been waiting for this moment. I yanked on the door handle. It didn't budge. Locked. I tried the window, wouldn't move, and that's when he finally spoke. Almost there. I didn't wait to find out what he meant. I did the only thing I could think of. I started kicking. Hard. I slammed my foot against the back of his seat, causing the car to lurch. He grunted, momentarily distracted. That was enough. I reached down, grabbed my backpack, and swung it forward, smashing it into the gear shift. The car jerked violently to the side. I didn't hesitate. I unlocked the door manually, I don't even remember how, and threw myself out of the moving car. I hit the pavement hard, rolling onto my side, gasping for breath. The taxi screeched to a stop. For one horrifying second, I thought he was going to come after me, but when I looked up, the car was gone, just gone. No headlights, no taillights, no sound of an engine, just an empty alley. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I found a main street. A bar was still open, and I stumbled inside, out of breath. A bartender saw my panic and asked what happened. I told him everything. The silent driver, the wrong turn, the smile. His face went pale. "That sounds like the devil's taxi." I blinked. "What?" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "There's a legend about a taxi that picks up people late at night, and they're never seen again. I left Buenos Aires the next day, and now, when I travel alone, I never take the first taxi I see, because I still wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't escaped?" I've stayed in a lot of hostels while traveling. They're cheap, convenient, and a great way to meet new people. But after what happened in Lisbon, I don't think I'll ever book one again. It was my second night in the city. I had spent the day exploring, and by the time I got back to my hostel, I was exhausted. The room was a 6-bed dorm, but only one other person had checked in. A woman. She was already in bed when I arrived, facing the wall, completely still. I tried to be quiet as I got ready for bed, setting my bag down, brushing my teeth, scrolling through my phone. I noticed something odd. She wasn't snoring, she wasn't shifting, she wasn't breathing, but I told myself, she's just a deep sleeper. I turned off my phone, rolled over, and drifted off. At 3 a.m. I woke up, not to noise, to silence. A heavy, pressing silence that made my skin crawl, and then I realized I wasn't alone. The room was pitch black, but I felt it. Someone was standing near my bed. I held my breath, listening. At first, nothing. Then, a slow, shuddering inhale. Right next to me. My body locked up. I wanted to turn, to grab my phone, to see who was there. But I couldn't move. The breathing grew louder, closer. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. And in the dark, I heard the soft creak of bed springs. Whoever it was had just crawled back into their bed. I clenched my eyes shut and waited for morning. The first light of dawn spilled through the window, and I let out a shaky breath. I turned over, finally daring to look at my roommate. She was still in bed, still facing the wall, still completely motionless. I didn't want to wake her, didn't want to deal with whatever weirdness had happened last night. So I packed my bag quickly and left. At the front desk, I handed over my key and hesitated. "Hey, do you know if my roommate checked out yet?" The receptionist frowned, typing into the computer. "Room 12, right?" I nodded. She glanced at the screen, then back at me. "You were the only person in that room." I laughed nervously. "No, I mean the woman. She was already in bed when I arrived." The receptionist shook her head. "There hasn't been anyone else booked in that room all week." My stomach dropped. I turned back toward the hallway, heart pounding. The room. Was she still in there? I almost ran back to check, but I didn't. I walked out of that hostel and never looked back. But now, whenever I stay somewhere new, I always make sure of one thing. I watch my roommates closely, because next time, one of them might not be real. I love hiking alone. There's something about the quiet isolation of the woods that makes me feel at peace. No distractions, no city noise, just me, my thoughts, and the trail ahead. This time, I had planned a solo camping trip deep in the mountains. A well-marked hiking route, a few days of fresh air, and no one else around. Perfect. At least that's what I thought. Because by the second day, I realized I wasn't alone. And worse, I couldn't leave. I woke up to the sound of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the unnatural kind. No birds, no rustling leaves, no wind, just nothing. I stepped out of my tent, stretching, shaking off the feeling. Maybe I had just woken up at a weird time. I checked my GPS. Everything looked fine. I packed up my gear and started hiking back toward the trailhead. Except, the path was gone. At first, I thought I had just gotten turned around. That happens, right? So I backtracked, followed the markers I remembered from the day before. But the deeper I went, the less familiar everything became. The trail wasn't there. The footprints I had left yesterday were gone. And no matter which way I turned, I always ended up back at my campsite. Panic started creeping in. I knew this trail. I had mapped it out. I should have been able to find my way back. I checked my GPS again. It still showed I was right where I was supposed to be. But the path ahead, it didn't exist. I took a deep breath. Maybe I just needed to stay calm, retrace my steps, and walk in a straight line. So I did. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And yet, when I looked up, I was back at my campsite. And there, in the dirt, were footprints leading up to my tent. But they weren't mine. They were deeper, larger. Like someone or something had been walking in circles around my tent all night. By now, my heart was hammering. I wasn't just lost. Something was keeping me here. I grabbed my gear and tried again. This time I walked toward the sun, keeping it at my back, refusing to stop. Then, just as I felt like I was making progress, I heard it. A whisper, low, software coming from the trees. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. It was faint, almost like wind slipping through the leaves, except it wasn't wind, because the trees weren't moving. I turned slowly, scanning the thick woods around me. There was nothing. Then, from behind me, the whisper came again, closer this time. Stay. I ran. I didn't stop, didn't look back. Branches scraped my arms. Roots nearly tripped me, but I just kept running. I had no idea which direction I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. Then, after what felt like forever, I saw it. A road. A narrow, cracked asphalt road cutting through the trees. I sprinted toward it, gasping for air, and the second my feet hit the pavement, the forest went silent again. I turned, looking back. The trees were still, too still, and standing just at the edge of the forest, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure, tall, motionless, watching. I didn't wait to see what it was. I followed the road, never looking back again. When I finally reached a small gas station miles away, I told the clerk I had been hiking and gotten lost. He gave me a strange look. "Which trail?" he asked. I told him the name. He frowned. "That trail's been closed for years. Too many hikers went missing." I never went hiking alone again. I love traveling alone. There's something freeing about it. Just me, my backpack, and the open world. No schedules, no expectations, just wherever I decide to go next. This time I was taking a train through Europe, somewhere between France and Germany. It was a quiet, late-night ride, the kind where the rhythm of the tracks almost lulls you to sleep. The train car was nearly empty, just a few scattered passengers. I found an empty seat by the window and settled in, staring at the passing countryside, lost in thought. That's when the old man sat across from me. He was dressed neatly, an old-fashioned coat and hat, with piercing gray eyes that locked onto mine immediately. "Traveling alone?" he asked, smiling. I nodded, not thinking much of it. He seemed friendly enough. "That's good," he said, leaning back. "It's important to see the world on your own terms." I agreed, and soon we were chatting. He asked me where I'd been, and I rattled off a few cities. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Ah, yes. And next, you're heading to Berlin." I froze. I hadn't told him that. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "How did you know that?" He just smiled. "Oh, and after Berlin, you'll be in Prague for a few days. Lovely city. You'll love the old town at night." My stomach twisted. I hadn't booked anything past Berlin yet. I was considering Prague, but I hadn't told anyone. He continued talking casually, listing every stop I had made on my trip, the places I had stayed, even what I had eaten at a cafe in Amsterdam. I felt myself stiffen. This wasn't possible. I'm sorry, have we met before?" I asked. He gave a small chuckle. "Not yet." I suddenly felt trapped. The train car was too quiet. The other passengers seemed frozen in place, not even shifting in their sleep. I gripped my backpack tightly, my heart hammering. "I think I should move seats." His smile widened. "Why? We're just getting to the good part." The train lurched. The lights flickered. I glanced at my reflection in the window, and he was sitting next to me. I jumped to my feet, backing away. He was still in his original seat, staring at me, but somehow I had seen him beside me. My hands were shaking. I needed to get off this train. I turned and rushed toward the next car, throwing open the door between compartments. Cold air rushed in as I stumbled through. When I looked back, he was gone. I spent the rest of the ride standing by the exit doors, gripping the rail. When the train finally pulled into Berlin, I grabbed my bag and ran off without looking back. I never saw him leave the train. To this day, I have no idea who he was, but when I checked into my hostel that night, the receptionist handed me a key and smiled. "Welcome. We've been expecting you, Mr. My last name." I hadn't given them my name yet. I travel a lot for work, and at this point, hotels all blur together. Same lobby, same generic artwork, same slightly too stiff pillows. I don't mind it, though. It's just part of the job. This time, I was in a small boutique hotel in a quiet part of the city. The place had charm, warm lighting, vintage decor, and an old-fashioned key card instead of a digital one. "Room 209. The receptionist said with a polite smile as she handed me my key. I took the elevator up, wheeling my suitcase behind me, already picturing myself collapsing onto the bed. But as I reached my door, I hesitated. There was already a key card in the lock. For a second, I just stared. That wasn't normal. I knocked lightly. No answer. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. Maybe housekeeping forgot it? I decided to swipe my key card anyway, and the door clicked open. Inside, everything looked normal. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. But something felt wrong. That's when I saw it, a suitcase in the corner, and on the nightstand, a half-finished drink, the ice still melting. I felt my stomach twist. Someone was already in this room. I backed toward the door, reaching for my phone to call the front desk, but before I could dial, something creaked. The bathroom door. It had been closed before. Now it was slightly open. My pulse pounded in my ears. If a guest was already checked into this room, they should have responded when I knocked, but whoever was in there was completely silent. I took a slow step back, about to leave, when I noticed something even worse. The suitcase in the corner. The luggage tag had my name on it. A wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just a mix-up. Someone had been expecting me. I turned and bolted out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway felt longer than before, stretched impossibly far. I reached the elevator and slammed the button. The doors took too long to open. When I glanced back at room 209, my breath caught. The door was wide open, and standing in the shadows of the room was a figure, not moving, just watching me. The elevator dinged. I jumped inside and slammed the lobby button over and over. I didn't breathe again until the doors slid shut. I practically ran to the front desk, demanding to know who else was checked into my room. The receptionist frowned, typing on her computer. "Sir, I'm sorry, but—" She hesitated, her face suddenly pale. "No one else is booked in room 209. I shook my head. "That's impossible. There was a suitcase, someone's drink. I saw someone in there." She looked genuinely unsettled now. "Sir, room 209 has been out of service for months." I stared at her. She turned the monitor toward me, showing the booking records. My reservation had been made for room 308. I never should have been sent to 209. I left the hotel that night. To this day, I don't know who or what was in that room. But I do know one thing. When I check into a hotel now, I always double-check the room number.